Good morning. On behalf of New York Law School and Dean Anthony Crowell, I welcome you to the 174th CityLaw Breakfast that began in 1994. I am Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and the Director of the Center for New York City Law. Thank you for attending and for making CityLaw Breakfast such an important public forum. I want to thank our three generous and loyal founding sponsors of these CityLaw Breakfasts. They are Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. I also want to thank the attendees who voluntarily contribute when they sign up to attend the breakfast. The names of these wonderful individual contributors are listed in the email sent after every breakfast with the link to the video. We are enormously grateful for these contributions that make CityLaw Breakfast possible. After Commissioner Hank Gutman's prepared remarks, we will have a question and comment session. We encourage you to submit a question or a comment at any time during the breakfast. The questions and comments will be collected as the breakfast continues and as the questions come in. To submit a question or comment, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. We do ask that you please identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. We are delighted to welcome DOT Commissioner Hank Gutman to our CityLaw Breakfast series. Hank Gutman was born in Philadelphia, grew up in the New Jersey suburbs, and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard Law School. After law school, Gutman clerked for U.S. District Judge John F. Dooling in the Eastern District of New York. He then joined Simpson Thacher, where he became a litigation partner and head of the Intellectual Property Department. Gutman retired from Simpson Thacher when he reached their mandatory retirement age. He is a longtime resident of Brooklyn Heights and has built an extraordinary and distinguished record of public service. As a board member, Gutman was a major force in the creation of the glorious and hugely beautiful Brooklyn Bridge Park. As chair of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Gutman led the Navy Yard to major economic successes, including doubling its occupancy. As a member of the BQE task force, Gutman led the discussions, which resulted in an agreement on the future rehabilitation of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. It was Gutman's important civic accomplishments that brought him to the attention of City Hall and led Mayor de Blasio to offer Gutman the position of DOT Commissioner. In the 8 months that Gutman has been DOT Commissioner, he's racked up major accomplishments. These include a new dedicated bike lane on the Brooklyn Bridge, an ingenious plan for the rehabilitation of the BQE, and the implementation of new busways and bikeways. And now, Commissioner Gutman has zeroed in on freight movements in New York City. New York Law School is honored to welcome Hank Gutman to the Center for the City Law Breakfast Forum. Hank, the floor is yours.
Ross, or should I say Commissioner Sandler, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be at New York Law School, where I've had the privilege of being on the adjunct faculty. If any of my students are listening today, I miss you. I look forward to rejoining you in the classroom sometime soon. I'd also like to thank two of my DOT colleagues, Jeannie Kim, my Chief Strategy Officer, and Kate Mikuliak from our policy group on issues such as freight. I pontificate. They're the ones who make it a reality, and I want to thank them, and Kate's going to be handling the slides today. And last but far from least, I want to say what an honor it is, Ross, to be with you again today. For those who don't know, on that BQE panel that Ross referred to, the expert panel, I had the privilege of sitting next to Ross for several hours every Wednesday afternoon for a year or so, trying to figure out what to do with this problem. And Ross was a kind and gentle teacher in all of the issues of transportation, which now I am dealing with. And I must say that since taking this position, Ross has also been one of the people, the handful of people that I rely on often for advice and who I reach out to. So Ross, it's a real treat to be with you today. So let's get to the subject of reimagining how freight moves in New York City. Kate, if you could start the slides, that would be great. I mean, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. Next slide, please. The DOT's mission is the safe, efficient, and environmentally responsible movement of people and goods within our city. Now, the people part was already well underway when I joined the DOT. The mayor has had an ambitious plan for reimagining how people move through the city. The entire focus is on reducing dependence on private automobiles by focusing on everything from walking to cycling to all manner of mass transit. And we've made major improvements in all of those areas. And my job has been to try and make sure that we meet those commitments. The mayor set some very, very ambitious targets, and we've been working furiously to try and live up to all of that. That's on the people side. The other piece of this is in the process, and as a result of the pandemic, we've been reclaiming the streets for people. It's not just moving people, it's giving the streets back to the people, which is why another important part of the mission has been making open streets, open restaurants, open education, open culture, everything open, a permanent part of the architecture of New York City. We discovered as a byproduct of the pandemic that the people of the city want their streets back for non-vehicular use. And we've been working hard on doing that, and we're very proud of that program. And again, we're going to make sure that that's a permanent part of the mayor's legacy before we complete this term. But what's missing from this equation is how goods move. And so one of the things that we've been focusing very hard on in the last 8 months, and will for as long as we're enabled, is how goods move in New York City. And this is a serious issue. I think it's one of the most important transportation issues that we confront as a city, that we confront as a nation in the 21st century. And the issue is trucks. Today, nearly 90% of the goods in New York City are carried by trucks. That is higher than any of our peer cities. Most of the other major cities, it's 75, 80%, something like that. It's 90%. So what's wrong with trucks? Why is this an issue? Well, they're too big. They don't fit on our city streets. Every New Yorker has an experience of seeing in their own neighborhood. I don't care where you live. Everybody has seen the oversized truck that tries to make a turn and can't fit, doesn't make it. They're too heavy. This was an issue we confronted on the BQE, where this is just as one example, there's the photo. One example, that stretch there, the triple cantilever, which after decades of being salted and then salt and water doing what they do to concrete and rebar, is a serious issue. As you can see, it's a major truck highway. When we were on the expert panel, they kept telling us, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, because this is the truck highway through Brooklyn. And as a 40-year Brooklyn resident, I thought, oh, I'm so proud we have our very own truck highway. And then I scratched my head and said, I'm sorry, why do we need a truck highway? Why is this so important? So it's not just that it's a truck highway, but this structure was built 70 years ago with an expected useful life of 50 years to accommodate the then legal limit size trucks of the day, which weighed 70,000 pounds. Today, the legal limit's 80,000 pounds. And when we finally were able to put in weight and motion sensors on the road, we discovered that something like 20% of the trucks are overweight, some as much as 170,000 pounds. So imagine this happening on roadways all over the city, many of which were never designed to carry trucks of that weight, and many of which suffer from the same kind of structural infirmities that the BQE does. That's a big problem. There are also too many of them. They cause traffic jams. And there's a tension here because to the extent that you move to smaller trucks and you're carrying the same loads, by definition, you're going to have more trucks. So it's a tricky thing to address. And then finally, they're dirty, right? These diesel trucks pollute. And as we're trying to achieve a zero carbon footprint, et cetera, and do all the things we need to do to slow down or reduce, ultimately eliminate the impacts of climate change, these are a major issue. Complicating it, I just talked about all the things we're doing that are introducing different uses on our streets. Those streets are not getting bigger. And to the extent we expand sidewalks and we take streets and turn them into plazas, et cetera, the street space is getting smaller. So the problem of accommodating these trucks gets worse, gets harder by virtue of everything else we're doing in reclaiming our streets. But that's not all. The problem is getting worse. Kate, next slide, if we could. Freight demands are growing. This is not a stagnant situation. The combination of our reduced reliance on deliveries and on e-commerce, A, because of what was happening in e-commerce to begin with, and B, what's happened during the pandemic, means that not only do we have the existing crisis, but there is every reason to believe it's going to keep getting worse. And if you look at the jump from 2019 to 2020 as indicated on this graph, that is a pretty clear indication of what we're up against. And for those who haven't a recent memory of a truck not being able to make the turn, the photograph on the right should give you a reminder. And the clutter on the street as a FedEx truck is unloading is a clear example of how industry is dealing with the issue today. So this is a major problem. And if at this point you're thinking, no problem, piece of cake, I got this, let me introduce one more area of complexity. On these issues, as on virtually everything we do in transportation in the city of New York, it is a multi-agency problem. We don't have the jurisdiction alone to deal with anything that we're talking about today. And when we get into the potential solutions to the freight issues, you will see there's EDC, Port Authority, MTA, various other agencies, both other city agencies and agencies like MTA and Port Authority, which are creatures of multiple governments. All of these require agencies to break down the traditional bureaucratic resistance and the silos that cause agencies to tend to think in terms of their turf, their issues, their concerns, and not work seamlessly across agency lines. That's been a major hurdle, and it's something that we've been focusing very, very hard on addressing. And Jimmy and Kate are two of the principal change agents there. So that's the problem. That's the issue we confront. So what do we do about it? Next slide. Well, we've broken down the silo between the New York City DOT and the EDC. The report you see on the left was one that the EDC published, I forget how many years ago. I'm not sure it got the attention. Strike that. It didn't get the attention and the resources that it deserved, and we're trying to fix that now. On the right is our report. We are working together. We've created a task force. The notion is seamlessly to address these issues. So this includes how goods move to the city, into the city, shifting from trucks to trains, to marine barges, marine vessels of all forms, and trying to change how goods move within the city. To the extent that we continue to rely on truck deliveries, which they're not going away overnight, to make them more efficient, making them cleaner and more compliant, trying to enforce the rules to get them to stick with the limits as to which sizes and weights of trucks are permitted on which of our streets, limits which today are largely ignored, sadly. And then shifting from trucks to other vehicles. The example given here is bicycles, but we've got a dizzying array of potential answers when it comes to the vehicles. So let's go to the next slide. Moving freight into the city, railways. This is an underutilized, as trucks became the dominant means of moving things to the city, railways became an underutilized resource in this regard. So why is this? Well, there were transload problems. There were, how do you get from here to there problems? How do you connect? All of the intermodal issues. We are working hard with various partners, and here's where entities like Port Authority and MTA, et cetera, become part of the mix to improve access by rail, to make that a more attractive way to get things to the city. Next slide. And now we've hit my favorite subject, moving freight into the city, our waterways. I have taken in my time at the DOT to beginning meetings on this subject by asking the question of whoever's in the conference room. And sadly, I apologize, some of them have heard this so many times, I'm sure they're sick of it. But the question is, why is New York City where it is? Why aren't we in the middle of Ohio or something, or upstate? Why are we here? And our offices at 55 Water have a spectacular view of the East River and the harbor, you know, and the bridges and the Statue of Liberty, the entire thing. I point to the window and say, this is why we are here. We are here because of that harbor and these waterways. We are a waterfront city. We have 5 boroughs, 2 of which are islands, 2 of which are a major part of a 3rd island, and the 5th is a peninsula. All of them are surrounded by water. That's why we're here. I have a mid-19th century lithograph of New York Harbor when the skyscrapers were church steeples. And it shows the river full of all manner of vessels. Why? Because those rivers were our original highways. Why aren't we using them for freight? The only freight shipped consistently on those rivers today is garbage. Garbage and recycling. The mayor with the New York City ferry service reclaimed them for passenger use. There's now a thriving passenger ferry system for the first time in, I don't know, 100 some odd years. But why aren't we doing it for freight? This is a huge opportunity. We have to modernize our marine terminals. We have to expand waterfront access to the maritime shippers. We have to support the efforts in the private sector to make better use of the waterway. The private sector is a key factor here. When we talk about these things, when we talk about intermodal distribution centers and switching to barges and switching to ferries, this is not some far off futuristic vision. The businesses whose livelihoods depend upon this, you know, the Amazons, the UPSs, et cetera, the FedExes, the US Postal Service, they're all doing this. They are all moving in this direction right now. This is not some unproven concept. This is the future. And the question is whether New York City embraces it and facilitates it and makes sure that it happens in a way that is sufficiently thoughtful of the concerns of the various neighborhoods, et cetera, that are affected by all of this, or whether it just happens, or whether we're in the way of it and it doesn't happen. This is happening and we need to help and we need to guide. And that's our function here. And the waterways are the perfect example. So next slide, Kate. So that's getting stuff to the city. That leaves open the daunting problem, which all of us encounter every single day, which is how do we move freight within the city? What the logistics people and the shipping people refer to as the last mile. I keep saying in New York City, that's more like 9 miles or 10 miles. It's the distance from the commercial site, waterfront or otherwise, where whatever the large vehicle is can unload and things get put into smaller, environmentally friendly, neighborhood friendly vehicles to go the last mile, using the term very loosely. So what are we doing? There's some things we're doing now. There are a bunch of other things that we're working on and hope to will introduce one way or the other going forward. How do we make deliveries more efficient? We've created neighborhood loading zones. We're expanding them. We have a pilot program. I hate that term because the things we're talking about here the precise logistics may need piloting, the details may need piloting, but the notion that this is something that has to happen is not open, I don't think, to serious debate. Increasing deliveries in off-peak hours obviously has to happen. There are major cities around the world that only allow deliveries in off-peak hours, and their people eat very well, they shop, they get what they need to survive. Why can't New York do this? This is something that we're working hard on. We have a quote pilot program doing it, but we are under instructions from the mayor, and we are working, trying to use our best creative skills and enlisting the help of the private sector to turbocharge that effort. Promote urban consolidation programs. These are the places where you can drop off the goods and then shift them into smaller, more environmentally friendly vehicles. Everything from cargo bikes to regular bikes to push carts to small electric vans and vehicles. Some of the new FedEx and UPS trucks, for example, are smaller and environmentally friendly and don't present the same neighborhood breaking, infrastructure destroying, polluting problems that their large diesel predecessors do. Creating places, I mean, look, you see boxes left on the street where they'll be picked up by people with carts to make the final deliveries on that block. That's a fairly inelegant solution. There are better ways to do that. We're looking to help create that. Again, raises the issues of what you're doing to allocation of sidewalk and street, and there's lots of competition for that, much of which we create because of the needs and demands of the people of New York. But these are all issues. And on the left, bottom left, you see an example of something that's an alternative. So we're exploring all of those options. Next slide. Trucks. Again, just like the efforts on people moving are not going to eliminate the car tomorrow. We're trying, the realistic goal there is to reduce dependence on the private automobile by making mass transit more readily available, particularly in communities that are underserved, by making it faster, more efficient, et cetera, through cycling, through pedestrian access, everything, car share, all the different things that we're doing are all intended to reduce dependence on the private car. But if you go around New York City, you see that there are areas which geographically, access to public transit wise, look more like New Jersey or Connecticut or Westchester than they do look like Midtown Manhattan or Brownstone, Brooklyn. So, the car isn't going away soon, but we want them to be electric, which is why we are turbocharging our efforts to make charging more readily available within the city of New York. Well, same's true for trucks. We want to reduce reliance, but we're not being silly about this. We don't think they're going to disappear tomorrow. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that what trucks do survive and do need to survive, do need to be part of the future of the city, are clean. We have a clean truck program where we basically provide financial incentives for companies that want to trade in or get rid of an old truck that was polluting and replace it with something that's environmentally friendly. And again, we are encouraging charging stations. If you're going electric, what's the big challenge? You need to have a place to charge your car. So we are working very hard on making sure that that's available for everybody, between people who have a private car that they need to charge to the trucks too. And this photo shows a place in the Bronx at Manhattan Beer, where we had a ribbon cutting ceremony, a new class of trucks. This is something that only existed in California before. We were the first folks to have it on the East Coast. Electric trucks, refrigerator trucks that deliver beer, certainly a priority in some households, including mine. And this fleet of trucks, the launch of this fleet of trucks and the charging station for it was something that we all gathered in the Bronx to celebrate. Again, if trucks are going to be part of our future, we want them to be smaller, we want them to be legal, we want them to comply with our local traffic requirements, and we want them to be green. So we're doing that. We also have green loading zone pilots where we would like to allocate curb space, which, as I've said, has become increasingly precious as there are more and more specialized dedicated uses. What's one incentive to go green? Well, an incentive to go green is having parking or unloading space, in this case, that's reserved for you. One more reason to make the switch, to do what's right for the environment and for your neighbors and for yourself. So that's another thing that we're working on. Next. And now we get to the question of compliance. And this is, we're talking about trucks here, but they aren't the only offenders. One of the great difficulties that one encounters when one sits in my seat at the DOT is that we have the ability to make laws, to create regulations, to divide up the street and sidewalk terrain in more and more different specialized ways and specialized uses. But we have very limited ability to enforce those laws. Most of what we do requires either automated enforcement, and there's great technology available, and I'll talk about some in a minute. Great technology available today that allows us to use automated enforcement to help do what otherwise you would need police officers on the street stopping vehicles to do. But the city of New York, and this is kind of shocking. I mean, I understand that those who've spent careers in city government have taken this as a given. As someone new to being inside the government, hadn't been full-time inside the government since I was a law clerk, and that was more than a few years ago, and it was on the federal level. The fact that New York City doesn't have the legal authority to use existing, reliable, proven technology to enforce its own laws without the express permission of Albany is kind of shocking. Happy to hear how we fix that, but in the meantime, we keep going to Albany for permission, and it's a real issue. It's an issue when it comes to speed cameras. This is a subject I've been speaking about pretty much any time I've been in front of a microphone in the last several months. I mean, we have a very effective speed camera program, which actually does reduce speeding in the areas where we have the cameras installed. 70% reduction. I mean, that's not chopped liver. That's serious reduction. But we aren't allowed to run the cameras overnight and weekends when 30% of the fatalities occur. And there's legislation we're waiting on in Albany to give us that power. You know, silly that we can't do that. For trucks, and this is a subject that Ross and I spent many hours working on together on the BQE expert panel. As I said, in talking about the BQE, we have a ridiculous situation in terms of overweight trucks on that road. And it's not just that road, it's all over the city. We have ridiculous problems enforcing the law when it comes to the oversized trucks that aren't allowed on our city streets, but go there anyway. Enforcement is a huge problem. And on the weight, on the weight stuff, on the BQE, when the mayor announced and the police department introduced a blitz, a major push to use our traditional police-based enforcement mechanisms on oversized trucks on the BQE, which consisted of trained officers spotting trucks they thought were oversized, pulling them over, having them weighed, issuing summonses, et cetera. It turned out we were catching maybe 1% to 2% of the offenders. That was it. That's the best you can do by eye. There is technology. Here's the good news. This is one success story in terms of getting Albany's permission. It's called weigh in motion technology, combined with cameras. This technology, it's very simple, and other places in the country have been using it for some time. This is not, again, this is not far out. This is not a moonshot. This is proven technology being used in other jurisdictions, but that New York hadn't used yet. In the course of the work on the expert panel, Ross and some of the engineering experts raised with us the fact that this technology exists. And we pushed the DOT to, even though there was no ability to use it to enforce, let's at least install some so that we can measure how bad the problem is. And that's how we know what percentage of trucks are overweight and that some of them weigh as much as 170,000 pounds. We have now finally gotten from Albany, and I'm very grateful to the elected representatives who worked so hard to make it happen and all the advocates who pushed them to it. We now can do that in the one location on the cantilever of the BQE. And we are putting the technology in now with the cameras, et cetera, and we hope to have it up and running early in the spring, where we will be able to give automated tickets to overweight trucks on that one piece of roadway. What about the rest of the city? What about all the other bridge structures in which their weight is a safety danger today? What about, again, all the city streets where, even without regard to weight, the size of the trucks makes them both illegal and dangerous? And the limited visibility. I mean, this is another issue. I mean, there's a further safety issue that we haven't touched on yet. Those trucks do not have great visibility. The city is in the process of modernizing its fleet to adopt the latest technologies and designs to make trucks safer, so that the driver has greater visibility of the immediate surroundings, and side guards so that people don't get swept underneath a truck and crushed. But the trucks that pass through, we have no such ability to deal with. And that's an issue. The oversized truck doesn't just run on a residential street, doesn't just run the risk of hitting a parked car or getting caught because it can't make the turn between the traffic signals and the utility poles and the parked cars, et cetera. But the people on the curb, the people, the young parent with a child in a stroller, the older person with the walker, they don't, or the cyclist, they don't see them. One of the things we've been doing to try and increase knowledge on this subject on the part of ordinary New Yorkers is we have these, and I apologize, I'm blocking the name of it. Everything we do has a particular acronym or a name. But we have these public events where we get a big truck and let people climb up into the driver's seat so that they can see how poorly the driver can see with the available mirrors, et cetera, and how huge the blind spots are, in the hope that pedestrians and cyclists and everybody else will be careful for their own protection when they see a truck coming by, because they are made more sensitive to the fact that the driver can't see them. I mean, all of these are reasons, as if we needed any more, why we really need to shift. We really need to change. The answer, the future cannot be more and bigger trucks. That just can't be it. Freight demands increase, but the answers have to be different. Kate? So what are some of the answers? We'll shift from trucks to bikes. The cargo bike program, again, we've got a pilot program, but we are pushing to expand it. once again, we run into a problem with the state because the current state law as to how wide these cargo bikes can be is less than the industry standard for the manufacturers who create these bikes, which means if you're going to have cargo bikes that are legal in the streets of New York, you can't buy what everybody else in the country can buy. You have to get something made specially for New York. We're trying to fix that. But again, this is happening. These are today pictures. These are things that are happening on the streets of New York, not because, I mean, we're encouraging it. We're trying to promote it. We're creating space to make it easier for these people to do it. But these are initiatives that the private sector is pursuing, and we want more. We want better. This is part of the answer. Next. So, I mean, before turning to the how we do it, I guess the last point I would add is there is no single answer here. There is no silver bullet. This is part of the frustration. This is why part of why I'm, people look at this problem, throw up their hands and figure we're never going to fix it. There's nothing we can do. We might as well just learn to live with it. That's obviously not our approach at the DOT, not today. Bicycles alone won't fix it. Overnight deliveries alone won't fix it. Freight ferries alone won't fix it. Barges alone won't fix it. We have to do all of the above. We have to maximize our creativity. We have to take good ideas from any and all sources. Good things, smart things that are being done in other cities around the world. There was an old school of thought, well, that's San Jose, it wouldn't work in New York. We're bigger, we're different, blah, blah, blah. We're now flipping that around. The answer is with the intellectual and human capital that New York has, we should be innovating in this stuff, not reluctant to follow or adopt good ideas from other places because it wasn't invented here, or gee, we're so much bigger and more complex, it couldn't possibly work here. Let's think about it for 10 years and then do a modest pilot program. Nonsense. I mean, early on in our tenure, we had this conversation with Jimmy, and I met with Kate and her colleagues in the policy group, and they had a spectacular array of great ideas that they were referring to as moonshots because nobody had been taking them seriously and trying to pursue them. When we ended that meeting, I outlawed the use of the term moonshot in the agency. Why? Because if it's being done in San Jose, or it's being done in Copenhagen, or it's being done in Dublin, we heard stuff about Dublin yesterday, or anywhere else, or Singapore, it's not a moonshot. It's just a good idea New York hasn't adopted yet. And so we are anxious to have ideas from any and all sources, including and in particular, the private sector. Because again, a lot of the best and most creative things that have been done in this city, at least in my lifetime, have involved public-private partnerships. And I mean, the whole Navy Yard model is public-private partnership. Ross referred to that before. I mean, there is nothing wrong with relying on the good ideas of the people whose livelihoods, who spend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars studying these issues and whose livelihoods depend on them being solved. We should, obviously we have to protect the public interest. Our interests do not totally align with theirs and may not align at all. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't listen and take advantage of any good ideas. Other governments, other cities, other countries, public sector, private sector, everybody, we want the ideas. So then what? Well, we need the political support for the legislative and regulatory changes. I mean, this is critically important. If any of the advocates are on the phone, this inability of the city of New York to make effective use of known technology to enforce all of the laws which you want us to enforce and we want to enforce, that's a problem that's solvable, and it requires political will and it requires political support. Funding. As I say, at some point in virtually every meeting we have at the agency, we are in the golden age. This year has been the last year of the 8-year de Blasio administration. Everybody has been focusing hard on meeting commitments, making sure that the legacy programs get completed, get to the finish line, or if you can't get them to the finish line, at least leave them in a really good place so that you can hand them off to the next administration. As we are emerging from the pandemic, city funding has become more available. And why is all of that? Well, because we now have federal funding. For the first time, it's not just that there was a deficit of federal support during the last 4 years, but right now, Infrastructure Week is no longer the punchline of a joke. It's Infrastructure Week, month, year. There is an incredible focus right now on federal support, federal funding for cities, for transportation, for infrastructure, social, physical, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the only issue is how much and which particular programs. There's no question that this is a rare golden period in terms of having those resources and having that focus available. We're crazy if we don't take full advantage of that. So we've been working really hard to tie up our programs to, we come out of a meeting and it's okay, great. How do we get this funded? Next step, I want to see which agency we go to, and I want the proposal, and let's get it out now. And if we need to call various elected officials to get support, et cetera, do it. There is a public, what it takes, and again, this is the public-private partnership. We have to have a public sector commitment to incentivize the private sector too. We want them working. We want us to be working in the same direction, not at cross purposes, to the extent we can. Again, I'm not suggesting that it's all a matter of what the private sector wants, far from it. But we need to look for those areas of common interest and exploit them. And again, if we don't take full advantage of this window in time, I don't know how long it'll be till we see another one. But we can't afford to wait. We have to act now. Okay, have we gotten to the end, or? Thank you. Yes, exactly. So before opening it up for questions, I just want to say a word in case we have any of the law students here. I just want to say a word about your legal training and what it equips you to do other than the obvious practice of law. When I was appointed to this job, for those who read the press coverage, it was IP lawyer, can't spell transportation if you spot him the trans, what is he doing heading the DOT other than being a friend of the mayor's, blah, 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 blah. Fine. But here's the point for you. Your legal training equips you to do lots of different things in life, including a job like mine. As an IP lawyer with a political science degree, trying cases around the country for very high stakes involving complex technology that I had absolutely no background in. My job was to ask the dumb questions, to work with the experts, to make sure that I understood what was going on, to push back, to question the orthodoxy. And then in the end, to translate it into a creative solution to a problem, a story that I could tell to a judge or to a jury, meaning you had to take all the complex technical stuff and break it down into its most simple elements to get rid of the trivia and focus on what really mattered. Those analytical skills, those problem-solving skills, the judgment, all that stuff that you're learning in law school and that you will learn in practice is absolutely transferable across disciplines, including and in particular into government, including and in particular into an agency where there are lots of technical issues and where there are lots of people, who you can take advantage of, who've been doing this for many years, build on their expertise, and where it's sometimes a really useful thing if an outsider comes in and says, yeah, I know this is the way you've been doing it for 20 years. Tell me why. Let's re-examine why that's the right way to do it. So again, this is for the young lawyers and soon to be lawyers. This is a message I'd like you to take away because it's really true. Anyway, Ross, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a very broad discussion and really stimulated a lot of questions. They've been collected by Brian Kasuba, our Associate Director of the Center for New York City Law, and we thank him and Lillian Valle Santiago and the staff of the center and the law school for their terrific work in putting together these breakfasts. Brian, what's the first question or comment?
Thank you, Ross. So we have a bunch of questions today. We'll try to get through as many as we can. I see some people ask several different questions, so we'll try to get everyone at least a chance to ask one question. So we'll first start off with Peter Cohen. Peter Cohen from the Transportation Research Forum. He has a question regarding the BQE between Atlantic and Brooklyn Bridge. What are the results of the lane reductions from 3 to 2?
Not if you're talking about traffic. Well, the reason we did it was to reduce weight and to improve safety, because those 3 undersized lanes with no shoulder and with no exit and entrance lanes at some key exit and entrance points, including on Atlantic Avenue. It was a safety issue, and it was also, and this was the other motivation, it was a weight problem. So we have reduced the weight, not as much as we will when we can use WIM enforcement to get rid of the overweight trucks. But if the question is traffic, there haven't been catastrophic consequences. We were prepared for the worst. We had police backup at, I forget, 70 different intersections where we thought there might be impact. And it turned out after the first week or two, we sent almost all of them home because we didn't need them. Traffic, I learned sitting with Ross, the modern traffic theory is that traffic's more like a gas than a liquid. It's not that it will find a new route. It expands or contracts based on the space available. And what we've done on the BQE shows that.
Great. Our next question is from Jeffrey Friedman from Building Intelligence Incorporated. Isn't there another problem that many of the trucks are less than 20% full and deliveries need to be consolidated?
Yes, absolutely. When it makes me crazy when I see the huge tractor trailer pull up in front of a local supermarket on a residential street that shall remain nameless, and they're unloading 3 pallets. Or even one of the big construction things where they've got 1 pallet on a truck that can't make any turns. I understand the truckers, this is an ongoing conversation with the truckers. I understand they think this is more efficient. They put everything on 1 load and then they make multiple stops. Yeah, but we need to find better ways. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Our next question is coming from Mark Diller. Deliveries by truck to retail and restaurants face huge challenges, which often result in double parking on commercial avenues. Please address the growing need for commercial and residential loading zones and where they should be located.
No, that's absolutely a problem. Our inability to enforce rules against double parking, are the bane of my existence. And B, we are in the process of introducing more commercial loading zones, neighborhood. I'm gonna mess up the name. I apologize to my team. Neighborhood residential loading zones, recognizing that some of the deliveries are to homes. A lot of the deliveries today are to homes, not businesses. So we try and place those in the appropriate residential neighborhoods too. But no, this is a huge challenge. We're working on it, but boy, do we have a lot of work still to do.
Next question is coming from Robert M. Brill from the Committee on Transportation. Isn't one aspect of the goods movement dilemma the division of labor on good movement between EDC and DOT? EDC over the last 35 years has been devoted mostly to land use issues as opposed to transportation infrastructure issues. What executive orders of the de Blasio administration exist concerning the division of labor issues?
I'm not conversant with the executive orders, but I can tell you what we've been doing. There are folks at the EDC who've been working on these issues. There's a fellow there named Andrew Genn who's been working on this for forever. And Rachel Loeb, who's the new head of the EDC, who came into office about the same time I did, we have decided whatever the executive orders are, I mean, we don't really care. I apologize to lawyers on the phone. We've decided that we were going to break down the barriers between the silos of the agencies, and we would work together as one team. And we've been doing that. We've got a joint task force to deal with this issue. That Jimmy Kim, my chief strategy officer, heads up. Kate's very involved in Kate Mikuliak is very involved in this on behalf of our policy folks. And Rachel's got people from her group, including Andrew. We have joint meetings, we have joint policies. We are coming up with joint approaches to all of this. So again, one of the horrors I encountered in taking on this job was the extent to which, even within city agencies where you don't have to deal with the state, et cetera, there were these silos. It just made me crazy. And so we've, by order of the commissioner, we've been wiping those out and working together with all of our related agencies. Same thing with MTA on buses. I've got a big bus event with them after this. Jan Oliver's an old buddy. When he took office, it's like, let's cut through the nonsense, work together as one team. I said, amen, brother, and we've been doing it. So I'm sure executive orders will catch up someday, but in the meantime, commissioners have the ability to exercise some self-help.
Next question from William Hubbard. What about the Cross Harbor Rail Freight Tunnel, which Congressman Nadler has been advocating for a number of years?
Its time may have come. I mean, this is certainly one of the options. Look, we've also found abandoned rail lines that could be put back into service, right-of-ways that exist. You know, the economics drove everything in a different direction, so they became neglected and near abandoned. Among the things we're looking at is reclaiming some of those, putting them back to work. You know, the rail tunnel, this may be the moment. All of these options are on the table. I mean, we're even looking at things like using in collaboration with our partners who actually control these lines, right? We're looking at things like, can you use the same line for passenger traffic at certain times of day and then have freight runs at other times of day? We've got a ferry system, right? It stops running, the city ferry stops running at 10 o'clock at night. Why aren't we using those boats in the evenings and overnight to move freight? I mean, small stuff, obviously, these aren't huge freight barges, but you could use them. You could put them to some use. I mean, you know, all options are on the table.
Next question is from Lou Venich. What is DOT doing to use the new narrowed triple cantilever operation on the BQE as a real-world opportunity to analyze its effects on diversions and traffic flows on other streets and highways in Brooklyn and beyond?
We're looking hard at that, and again, we've got a crack team. I mean, the DOT has some amazing internal resources in terms of traffic management. I mean, our traffic command center looks like something out of a science fiction movie with all the monitors on the wall and what you can watch. And we've also employed some of the world's leading experts to work with us on this. So we're looking hard at that. And we certainly plan to take full advantage of what we learned from the BQE and use that elsewhere. Look, let me give you another example. Brooklyn Bridge. One of the 3 inbound lanes from from Brooklyn and points beyond into Manhattan is now all bikes. You know, some thought that would create catastrophic traffic problems. Guess what? It didn't. It didn't. I live in the neighborhood. I see it. It didn't. What it did was it opened up cycling in both directions as a much more attractive option than it was before. And here's the, you know, it's a twofer or a threefer. It also freed the boardwalk above to be pedestrians only, because the sharing of that space between pedestrians and bicycles was both a real safety concern and a perceived safety concern on the part of the pedestrians in particular. I mean, the cyclists didn't like having to dodge around the tourists, and the tourists were scared to death when a bike came out of nowhere at high speed and they were afraid they'd get hit. So, you know, these things work, and we continue to learn from the experience.
Next question from Leonard Wasserman. Could you explain how New York City and New York State could legally control the federal interstate expressways like the BQE and the Cross Bronx without Washington's approval?
Well, legally, the things we've done are within our control. I mean, I don't want to get all technical, but these are the types of changes that we're allowed to do without permission from anyone. That doesn't mean that we do them without close consultation and advance notice to our federal and state partners, because we have. I mean, from the moment I was appointed to this job, having been, along with Ross and others, one of the authors of the BQE expert panel report, which recommended this as one of its recommendations, I made it clear to everybody I was dealing with, state, federal, or otherwise, that if we got the go ahead from City Hall, we were going to do this. So nobody should have been surprised that we did it. And again, we work very closely with our federal partners. We've got great partners at the relevant federal agencies. And under the Biden administration and with Secretary Buttigieg and Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg, my predecessor, you know, we've got very smart people working on all these issues.
Great. Our next question is from Paul Prokix, Land Use Counsel, who lives in the Financial District. His question has to do with, there's a disproportionate share of New Jersey truck traffic through the highly populated, densely trafficked streets of Lower Manhattan, as opposed to Staten Island. Will the new digital enforcement on the BQE Cantilever have the same effect as the new digitized tolling system on the Verrazano? What are you doing to balance that inequality?
Well, there are a number of things. Look, one of the distorting effects in truck traffic, well, I want to enforce the truck size and weight rules on the city streets, period. Okay, and we are working hard on finding effective ways to do that. B, a lot of what you're referring to in terms of where these trucks go is a distortion of the truck system based on tolls. When we were looking at the traffic stuff on the BQE, one of the things we discovered was that there are a large volume of trucks that drive through Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, including over the Triple Cantilever, and then up to the Bronx and on, who are not originating, stopping, or dropping anything off in New York City. And that trip takes them at least a half hour longer, and depending on traffic, maybe more, than staying on the New Jersey Turnpike. But they do it to avoid $100 in tolls for the big trucks. I mean, that's crazy, right? One of the things we're hoping congestion pricing will help deal with. On the BQE, we've got 30% of the cars in the morning, we're driving past the tunnel to avoid the toll, taking the toll-free Brooklyn Bridge instead. They were going out of their way to avoid the toll. So we're looking at a whole host of things, ranging from enforcement to rationalizing the toll system so that we stop creating these crazy incentives that add to our problems. I mean, that's a big thing. And one of the hopes for congestion pricing, if I haven't said this already, is that will help if the structure of the tolls is set up properly, that will help materially. It certainly should. It gives us a tool we can use to help address that.
Okay, we'll have time for one last question. This question is from Louise Moed from the Law Department. Are you suggesting that marine transportation could be a practical way to bring packages into the city from Amazon or other e-commerce businesses, or is that practical only as local transportation after shipping via long distance on train or truck?
Both. I mean, it can cover all, and it can cover local within the city. I mean, any and all. These are our original highways. And here's, and as traffic congestion, et cetera, makes some of these roadway alternatives less attractive, that provides an incentive to people to seriously explore and invest in our marine highways.
Okay, well, we're at the hour we have to stop. We'd like to do a hard stop at 10 o'clock. So thank you so much. I thought it was a wonderful morning. One of the joys of these breakfasts is the opportunity to learn, but also to get an appreciation of the personality and interests of the person. And today, I think we got a terrific opportunity to hear Hank Gutman, his enthusiasms, his interest in the field of transportation, and his immense knowledge that he has accumulated, and as well as his desire to break through and get some of these important things done for all of us. So thank you, Hank, for a wonderful morning. Thank you all for attending. We'll see you in 2 weeks with another breakfast. Thank you so much for attending. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Ross.